another major bill that'll be going through the House this year and Senate is a priority bill of the House. It's HB 5004. And the lead sponsor is Christine Palm. She was kind enough to join us for a discussion about that. So I talked to her earlier. So let's hear from Representative Palm, our guest this week on Connecticrats, the CT Dems podcast. So we're pleased to welcome to the podcast Representative Christine Palm. She's the rep for the 36th district. That includes Chester, Deep River, Essex, and Haddam. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
You're the vice chair of the Environment Committee, and you guys are doing a lot of work this year on a particular bill, the Climate Protection Act. Can you just give us like an overview of what that is and why this is the time to work on the Climate Protection Act?
Sure, I'd love to. Last year was a disappointing year for the Environment Committee. We did some great plant and animal bills, but we didn't address climate change as an overarching issue. This year, with the Speaker's Priority Bill 5004, we are doing 4 essential things. We're updating the state's Global Warming Solutions Act so that Connecticut is more in line with our neighboring states when it comes to greenhouse gas emission reduction targets. We're creating lots of incentives for businesses and municipalities that pivot to a green economy or sustainable practice. We are setting the stage to transition toward a clean economy in general, including more state accountability, workforce training, long-term policies that will help us wean ourselves from fossil fuel. And then finally, we're supporting and expanding nature-based solutions, which would include such things as protecting old-growth forests, which are a great carbon sink, and riparian buffers.
Talk a little bit more about coming into alignment with neighboring states. What's the situation right now? I mean, here in New England, we're pretty physically small states. We got decent populations, but sometimes a criticism lobbed at environmental action at the state level is that we're so small. What can we do? It won't have a big impact. Talk about that alignment.
Yes, that's one of my favorite arguments to argue against. We tout our position as being halfway between Boston and New York as an economic driver. But then when it comes time to do something about particulate matter and poor air quality, we throw our hands up and say, well, gee, we're too small to matter. If charity begins at home, so does environmentalism. And I believe we in government have a duty, moral and legal, to protect our citizens any way we can. And so even if it is a drop in the bucket, and frankly, I consider this bill just a good start. We should be doing far more radical things as a society, as a legislature, as a state government, as business people. We should be way ahead of where we are. So the very least we can do in Connecticut is to match our fellow New England states in this goal to reduce carbon.
At the international level, the Paris Accord set certain targets and goals for the United States and other countries. We had a 4-year deviation from our commitment to the Paris Accords, but now at the federal level and effectively international level, we're sort of trying to get back on track with that. I know the Biden administration through the EPA is doing some rulemaking to try to get us there. How does this tie in? How does this proposed bill tie into that in terms of carbon reduction targets, in terms of getting down to a point where we're frankly carbon neutral?
Yeah. So essentially, this is where it gets a little bit wonky. We're trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions 65% by 2040, and then have an economy-wide target of net zero by 2050. And I need to remind listeners that net zero does not mean no emissions. It means that we offset the emissions that we do produce by other means, carbon sequestration and such. And again, I think that with the argument that greenhouse gas emissions, and which is the major driver of climate change, is not a man-made problem. If ever that needed to be debunked, all we had to look at was COVID, when in 2022, at the height of the pandemic, that was the only year we met our greenhouse gas emissions, and that was because people were staying home. People were not driving around, and businesses were shutting down. So that is proof positive in real time that this is driven by humankind and our activities. And when I hear my colleagues talk about how human behavior has nothing to do with carbon emissions, I mean, I don't know whether to laugh or cry, because all you have to do is remember a couple of years ago how clear the skies were when people stayed home. And I'm not advocating that we go back to those times, that people stay home or that businesses shut down. I'm just saying that there's an example of how this is evident that greenhouse gas emissions can be reduced if we change our behaviors.
If you look back at some of the climate measures, first of all, if you look at the debate around this issue, where it just passed out of committee last week on a partisan vote, and then you go look back at the Clean Air Act in 2021 and some of the other discussions we've had, Republicans, it seems, often say, look, I'm for the clean environment. Of course I want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, just not now and just not like this. This bill seems to be more about incentives than anything else. Why is this a good one to do this year?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, David, because the strong message I got from leadership and from our policy people was create a bill that can be bipartisan because it will bolster the business community, which is the claim that the Republican caucus uses to fight climate bills. Well, it's too hard on business. It's too onerous on business. This bill is supported by CBIA and by the Sustainable Business Council of Connecticut. And we have any number of business leaders telling us they can't wait to take advantage of what this bill offers. So I would respectfully ask my colleagues, where is your support for business if you are against a bill that is chock-a-block full of tax breaks, incentives, waivers of fees, reimbursement rates that are greater than normal for the business people you claim to care about and protect? And I want to call special attention to farmers, because it's not enough for us in Connecticut to have a nostalgic attitude about our farmers. We love our, native strawberries and our delicious corn. But then when the farmers are decimated by floods and freak freezes, as happened last May 17th, after everything started to blossom out, where is your support for them when they know it's because of climate change? So this is an economic driver. I think more than anything else, more than any bill we've done, this is a bill that will help business. And a really good example, just to put a fine point on it, the Hotel Marcel in New Haven, which is a completely carbon neutral, zero footprint, if you will, business. The owner of that told me that it costs on average $15.50 to heat an occupied hotel room using fossil fuel. He pays $5 an hour through renewable sources. So what business person in his or her right mind wouldn't rather pay $5 an hour than $15.50? That's what this bill does.
At the end of this term, this will be your last term. You've announced that you're stepping down from the legislature. I've been there since 2018. Talk a little bit about your experience in the legislature, whether it sort of matched what you thought. Every year, a whole new crop of people step up and run for the first time. I think you have an expectation. In what ways did it match your expectation? In which ways did you find maybe some frustration? And what led to your decision to step down after 3 terms?
Well, both of those things are true. It was far better, more fulfilling, more aspirational, more full of remarkable people than I expected. At the same time, there is more compromise than I expected. I knew that there would be. In fact, when I decided to run for office, one of my sons told me my 2 biggest challenges would be not to swear so much, which I think I've managed to do.
I've not heard it. I've not heard one.
Not yet. The morning is young. And the other thing is to compromise on principles or things I really believe passionately in. And compromise is the name of the game when we are one of 13 states that allows the filibuster. So a lot of our bills have to get moderated, let's say, and modified in order to please our colleagues across the aisle. I will be honest, I have found that frustrating in nature because so often we seem to be working at cross purposes. But I'm a pragmatist, and I'm willing to do that, and that's what this bill does. So it was disappointing not to have any Republican votes out of committee, because we did exactly what they said they wanted us to do. So that kind of thing has been a disappointment. However, I have personally and with my colleagues managed to accomplish a great many things that I'm very, very proud of. So it has been a wonderful job, avocation, vocation, on balance. And I will miss it terribly. It's a roller coaster. So to the part of the question about what am I going to be doing instead, I am first and foremost a writer and a teacher. I was a journalist. I've been a high school teacher, a public speaker, a communications director. And I love those things deeply, and I want to get back to them. And I want to use them in service of advancing policy from sort of the outside. I want to help advocacy groups do a better job navigating the halls of power, if you will, now that I have seen and lived the inside baseball. So that's what I plan to do. Stay in the fight, but from a slightly different angle.